everybody. There are more coming, and I'm just very surprised and gratified that so many of you are here tonight. It is a very special evening to mark this occasion. I'm Marion Pallister, I'm the Pax Christi Scotland chair, and not only thank you all for coming, but also to thank all of our distinguished guests, our four speakers who are here this evening: the Right Reverend Dr. Martin Fair, Moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland; Baroness Miller of Chilthorne-Domer, Liberal Democrat, member of the cross-party anti-nuclear group in the House of Lords; Most Reverend Mark Strange, Primus of the Scottish Episcopal Church; and Bishop William Nolan, Bishop of Galloway and Bishop President of the Justice and Peace Commission. Now, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to do a little spot of housekeeping here, and I'm going to ask everybody to go on mute just to enhance the sound, and we're recording this evening as well. So if you don't wish to be seen, you could also turn off your video, but it would be lovely if we did see you all, if that's okay with you. It is certainly a day for celebration. The fact that this treaty has come into action today, but we're asking, what about Scotland? We're host to nuclear weapons, despite the stance of the Scottish Bishops' Conference and all of the churches and the Scottish government. So for us, we felt it was also a day for reflection and for prayer. Now, we're honoured that the Zavarian mission is Pax Christi Scotland's chaplaincy, and I'd like to introduce Father John Convery to open our vigil this evening. Father John.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our vigil. If we check our dictionaries and what we know already in our tradition, a vigil is a period of purposeful wakefulness, sleeplessness, a devotional watching and observance. In the Christian tradition, to mark major liturgical feasts and events, we prepare very often with a vigil. Why? Because such an event requires us to be ready, to be prepared, but not in a passive way. Praying as a community, reflecting as a community, and sharing as a community. Fundamental to any campaign for peace is the gathering together of all peoples, all faiths, all traditions, to work together for change. Change through dialogue, change through compassion. We gather together this evening with this purpose to our wakefulness, that the light of peace be kept burning, that the message of peace never be taken for granted in our very often fickle and uncaring world. We gather together this evening with this purpose to our wakefulness, that the peoples of the world may never again be subjected to the violence and horror of all weapons of war, and especially nuclear weapons. We gather together this evening with this purpose to our wakefulness, that the nations of the world be held accountable for their use of their weapons of war and destruction. We gather together this evening with this purpose to our wakefulness, to pray for the souls throughout history who have been the victim of humankind's indifference to the sanctity and preciousness of each person's right to live in peace. To quote the words of Pope Francis in Fratelli Tutti, and echoed by our Catholic leaders, surely in this era of increasing global interdependence and vulnerability, our faith invites us to seek the common and universal good. We are all saved together, or no one is saved. Let us now pray with the words of Pope Francis. Lord and protector of our human family, you created all human beings equal in dignity. Pour forth into our hearts a fraternal spirit and inspire us a dream of renewed encounter, dialogue, justice, and peace. Move us to create healthier societies and a more dignified world, a world without hunger, poverty, violence, and war. May our hearts be open to all the peoples and nations of the earth. May we recognize the goodness and beauty that you have sown in each one of us, and thus forge bonds of unity, common projects, and shared dreams. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much for that, Father John. It sets perfectly the scene for our speakers this evening. And first of all, I would like to introduce the Right Reverend Dr. Martin Fair, Moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. For over 30 years, the position of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland has been that the possession, threat of use, or use of nuclear weapons is inherently evil. Dr. Fair has reiterated that position, and last year, ahead of the 75th anniversary of the atomic bomb attacks on Japan, signed a Christian campaign for nuclear disarmament statement, encouraging other ministers to do so. Dr. Fair, you are very welcome this evening.
Thank you, Marion, and thank you to you all. It's a real honour to be with you this evening and a privilege to address you on this very special occasion. In my role as moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, sometimes I am asked to articulate the Church's position on one or other subject, and I'm happy to do so, but sometimes with a degree of ambivalence, perhaps when it isn't necessarily a subject that I am passionate about myself. On other occasions, the very opposite is true. That is, when I am personally invested. This evening is one such occasion. As a 17-year-old, and one who had become increasingly motivated by an expression of Christian faith that was rooted in justice and peace, I enrolled as an undergraduate student at the University of Strathclyde. And the very first thing I did was to become a member of the student CND group. That was in the early 80s when stockpiles of nuclear weapons were at their highest. I'm sure my parents would have preferred that my first move would have been to get a library card at the university. But at that time, it seemed to me that my being at university had to be about much more than the reading of books. Doubtless my grades were reflective of such an attitude. Well, that was nearly 40 years ago. And here we are tonight, celebrating something of a landmark moment. Landmarks are essential for those who embark on any journey worth making. Why? Because on a step-by-step, day-by-day basis, it can be difficult to monitor or measure anything that might be referred to as success. And yet, when a landmark is reached, when the journey is halted to allow the travellers to draw breath and reflect on the road taken thus far, suddenly it becomes obvious. Hey, we're actually getting somewhere. I'm a keen mountaineer who loves nothing better by way of recharging my batteries than to spend a day in the Scottish Highlands. I'm not shy about taking on long and often arduous trips, but when that is the case, it's essential to break the journey down into a number of shorter legs. And after completing each one, to stop, to admire the view, and to take stock of how much of the journey has been completed. This is that kind of moment. Stop, draw breath, see how far we've come. I made reference to the mid-1980s, at which time there were upwards of 61,000 nuclear weapons spread between the various nuclear powers, predominantly, of course, these being the United States and the Soviet Union. Today, that number stands at nearer 13,000, representing a reduction of some 80%. Now, in anyone's language, that is progress. And the signing of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons that we're recognizing today is further progress. Another significant landmark on the road to what we hope and pray will be ultimately total elimination. And let us not grow weary of the road or become downcast that there are many miles still to be travelled. Some years back, I was on the kind of mountain journey I described earlier, a 3-day hike across some of our rougher land. And the truth of the matter is that I'd taken on too much on that occasion, that my pack was weighing me down, that my energy levels were ebbing rapidly. I can still remember to this day where I was when I reached that low point, when I felt that I couldn't walk another step. I was far up the beautiful Glen Affric, but with a long distance still to cover, and well past the point of appreciating the beauty of my surroundings. And I stopped, not sure I could go on. And right then, in that moment, in front of me, there was a golden eagle, soaring and gliding, master of all it surveyed. Not a deer, but the monarch of the glen in that particular moment. And as I watched the eagle, there came to my mind verses that my great aunt had helped me to memorize as I was still a young child. Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint and strengthens the powerless. Even youths will faint and be weary, and the young will fall exhausted. But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up like wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Friends, that day in Glenafric, it was all I needed to pick myself up, to put one foot in front of the other, and to continue my journey. In the words of the old Scottish song, I was strengthened to keep right on to the end of the road. Might we trust in this same God as we commit ourselves to the part of the journey that remains ahead of us still in terms of the abolition of nuclear weapons? Doubtless, there have been and will be points along the way when signs of progress are few. Perhaps there will be frustrations in terms of the stance taken by the UK government. Certainly, there will be times when some will feel that the prospects of elimination are receding and will lie forever beyond the far horizon. In those moments, let us rise up on wings as eagles, strengthened by this mighty God who has promised that the day will come, not might come, will come, when they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. And when nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war no more. So yes, let us walk and not grow faint, always in the footsteps of the Prince of Peace, who declared, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." In May of 1945, as the Second World War neared its last days, and a few months before Hiroshima and Nagasaki, of course, the Prime Minister stood in the balcony of Buckingham Palace and told the crowds gathered below, "We may allow ourselves a brief period of rejoicing." Well, on this day, 22nd January 2021, we may allow ourselves a brief period of rejoicing in what has been achieved, for much has been accomplished. And then onward, ever onwards. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fair. And as we attempt to beat our swords into plowshares, we do take that few moments, that this day, to have a brief rejoicing. Thank you so much. I'd now like to introduce Baroness Miller of Chilthorne Domer, who is the Liberal Democrat life peer and member of the cross-party anti-nuclear group in the House of Lords. Baroness Miller has noted in the House of Lords that nuclear weapons, including our own Trident system, specifically target civilians. They target cities and women and children as a so-called deterrent. You can follow her on Twitter at Sue Miller, and you'll see her strong and continued commitment to rid the world of that so-called deterrent. Baroness Miller, welcome to our vigil this evening.
Well, thank you very much, Marion, and I'm really delighted and honoured that you asked me to be on this vigil with you this evening. And I must apologise to you for having a little panic earlier about getting onto Zoom because I'm not as technological as I'd like to be, but anyway, here I am. It is a great day because I think that the treaty coming into force is really a wake-up call to the nuclear powers that there are. And I don't think that the road to getting rid of nuclear weapons will suddenly become much easier. I don't think that the swords will be beaten into plowshares except by us all making an immense effort. But why is it such a cheerful day? It's a cheerful day because actually the countries without the big stick, without the nuclear weapons, they used their votes and they used their civil actions to bring this to the UN. And I think it was very moving to me that this happened in the same year, really, as the Black Lives Matter movement really came to people's consciousness so much, because many of the countries who've ratified the treaty and thereby made it law, many of those 81 countries are actually not, they're not Europeans, they're not big, powerful countries, they're not the countries that thought of themselves in the past as the imperialist nations. They are all the other nations, and they have banded together to say enough of these nuclear weapons. And I think not only because nuclear weapons are so, you know, the mutually assured destruction is so terrible, and it destructs not only the human race, but all the other species as well, if it brings on a nuclear winter and the exchange is so bad. But the other effect really is to say we will have a more democratic world. You won't just be on the Security Council because you have nuclear weapons. Now, of course, we haven't got to that stage yet, but I think that's what the UK, for example, is very afraid of, because, or the UK government is very afraid of, because whenever we raise the treaty in Parliament, and so far not many of us do raise it, they are very defensive, and they say, well, actually the nuclear proliferation treaty is what we're interested in. Well, of course, that has done a bit over the years to ensure that proliferation didn't happen. But the price for it not to happen, for countries not to develop their own nuclear weapons, was, of course, that the nuclear weapon states should start to disarm. And they didn't uphold that. So I think that the UK government is on the defensive, and I would certainly like to commend many church figures who over the years have really campaigned on this, starting perhaps with Monsignor Bruce Kent, who, of course, for years chaired CND, well, starting in my consciousness, because I think he was the first person I came across. And then in the House of Lords, which was quite a lonely place, really, to be anti-nuclear, because a lot of people think it equates with being unpatriotic, for example. The then Bishop of Chelmsford, who's now Archbishop of York, Stephen Cottrell, persuaded the Synod of the Church of England to vote that nuclear weapons were immoral, and they've taken a much stronger stance, and a really, I think it's a really powerful message there. For me, those of you in Scotland, you know, I feel quite envious of you, really, because you've got such a good stance against nuclear from your government, from the Scottish Women's Convention. You've got a very proud history of objecting to nuclear weapons. And one of the people I came across in the organization I belong to, which is an international organization for parliamentarians who want to see disarmament was a member of the Scottish Parliament, Bill Kidd. So he might be one of your MSPs, but Bill has been a long time, a great ally in the parliamentarians for nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. So, you know, I think we can't manage without Scotland and the Scottish voice in the UK in this movement, because you are a tower of strength to us. It's much harder down in England for lots of reasons. So I am honoured to share your evening this evening. I think the road will be difficult, but I think there are such practical things we can do immediately. And my current mission is to raise people's awareness that if you have a pension fund or a bank or anything, that you should be asking them, do they invest in any companies that are part of making nuclear weapons or components for nuclear weapons? Because I think actually cutting off the money supply, and there's been some wonderful work done on this, don't bank on the bomb and so on. I think that's a very powerful way to start to get the message across in a very practical way. So I'm sure you've all got lots of ideas of your own, but that's what I'm going to be working on over the next months and years. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Baroness Miller. And in fact, Pax Christi Scotland is in partnership with Don't Bank on the Bomb Scotland, and we're working towards divestment. And I would say to everyone to have a look at where their bank accounts and where their pension funds and so on are being invested, and to raise that and to help us to raise that along with Don't Bank on the Bomb. I would now like to pass over to the Most Reverend Mark Strange, Primus of the Scottish Episcopal Church. Like many here tonight, a witness at Fastlane Peace Vigils, a signatory to letters seeking the UK government to sign the treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons, and a man who has placed that treaty, which comes into effect today, on the agenda of the Scottish Episcopal Church. Primus, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. As I left my house this evening at Aberfili, don't go looking for it on a map, you'll never find it, it's on the Black Isle, to get to my office, which is at the other end of the garden. I was walking through a small blizzard, and thankfully my good jacket was hanging in the office, so you can't see the snow. But I did what I always do, particularly of an evening when I get to the wall, the boundary wall of the grounds, where there is a stunning view, even at night, out over the lights of the Black Isle. And I know that just there is Ben with us, because every day, particularly during this last year, I have spent a few moments just reflecting on how incredibly lucky I am to live in such a beautiful place, and how incredibly lucky I am to have a ministry and a job, I suppose, which enables me to give thanks for that every day. That's what I'm supposed to do. And as I was crossing, I had said thank you, and then I thought, now what am I going to say to them tonight? Because if I try and give you a theological viewpoint, well, the trouble is when I talk theology, I manage to bore myself, let alone anyone else. So I thought I wouldn't try that. And then I suspected that my dear friend Martin, who I listened to with great joy on a number of occasions, would have used most of the biblical references, and I'm right, he did. So that was fine. So I'm going to do what I normally do, and those who know me know this is how I operate. I'm going to tell you a story. I'll tell you a story about a wee boy. A wee boy who went off to a Cub meeting in the mid-60s. And was shown a film at the Cub meeting that evening of what to do if there was a nuclear attack. And this wee boy sat there and watched with great interest that he had to get the kitchen table sorted and get his dad to move the doors and get in supplies of tinned food. And all of those things seemed so practical, so easy for someone who was a good and faithful cub to go and sort out. So this young man skipped home and immediately began to demand that an extra supply of baked beans were brought in, and that the hinges on the door to the living room, which were could be easily removed, and that we would, and you can tell this was clearly me, we would weather the storm for a couple of weeks. That's what the film seemed to tell us. And then I could put on my cub cap and put on my necker, and I could go out and I could help all the elderly ladies who'd had more trouble getting the kitchen table sorted out. So I ran into the house, and I remember it. I ran into the house and I said to my mum, we've got to do this. And she just looked at me. Both my mother and my father had both served in the Second World War. That's in fact where they met. My grandfather had served in the First World War, and they both sat me down and took out 2 photographs. They were in the encyclopedia, flicked to the pages, and there were the photographs of the aftermath of the nuclear attacks in Japan. And they quietly explained to me why they were not prepared to move their kitchen table. They might be prepared to buy me some extra baked beans, but they weren't going to take the doors off the hinges. And I looked at those photographs and I said to my dad, who actually was quite angry that we'd been shown the film at all, said to my dad, well, what should we do? And as a man who had given up religion, even though by the end of his life he'd been ordained an Episcopal priest, that's another story, he just simply said, you spend every day praying for peace. He said, you can go and be an activist, you can go and push things, you can go and shout at people. He said, but what I really want you to do is to pray for peace, because if we can have peace, then there is no need for anything that can destroy. And my dad, who worked for agriculture and fisheries, spent most of his working life trying to care for the planet, for the seas around Aberdeen, basically. And he became very, very conscious that it's not simply a matter of what we do to each other. It's actually what we do to everything else. So when I am aware of things happening which can be destructive, when I am in situations where people are arguing, I tell them not the story of me as a cub, but the story of me as a teenager. I lived, like many of us, I lived through my teenage years and my early 20s scared, absolutely terrified that this was going to happen. And people said to me, oh no, that won't happen because we've got those bombs. That means we're safe. And I said, that doesn't make me feel any safer at all. If anything, it makes me feel even more scared. And they said it would stop war. And I watched young lads I was at school with who joined the Gordon Highlanders going off and being injured. I was aware of conflicts around the world, which were in places I couldn't even find on a map, but which were clearly people were being killed. It didn't seem to me there was any let up in aggression and warfare. And because I'm passionate about the beauty of the land that I live on, I couldn't see how anyone could willingly find a way to destroy all of that. So I have continually throughout my life said, how can you justify keeping something or increasing something or building something which not only frightens the people that you're trying to scare, but frightens the people you're trying to protect? How can that ever be right? How is it possible to believe that somehow by simply being the biggest boy in the playground that you can be protected? my anger at the fact that the deterrent for the UK is placed within the boundaries of Scotland is a political point which I feel deeply inside. But for me, primarily, and that's why I was so happy to join this vigil tonight, it's still what my dad said to me. If you want to end this, then you find a way to live in peace. And not just with your neighbour, but with those in other lands, those in other places, those who disagree with you, those who think they are difficult, those who you struggle with. Because until you can really and truly turn the other cheek, then ultimately there will be no peace. So what do I do? Oh yes, I can shout. I'm very good at shouting. I can make all the political statements. I do some of that and get myself into some rare trouble over that. What do I believe is most important is that each and every single day I pray for peace, and when I'm allowed to, we'll go and have a conversation with people, speak to them of peace. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. I think that I can see faces that that's resonating with a lot of people this evening. Like you, I can remember being a teenager and being absolutely terrified during the Cuban crisis, which kind of is a bit of a giveaway about how old I am. But we actually, as teenagers, talked very, very seriously and with great fear about how we were going to spend our last 4 minutes. And that's never left me. And I think that that's kind of the conversation that we're having this evening, that there is change is possible, but we all have a lot of work to do. So I'd now like to introduce Bishop Bill Nolan, Bishop of Galloway and Bishop President of the Scottish Catholic Bishops' Conference and Justice and Peace Commission. The Scottish Catholic bishops issued their first statement condemning nuclear weapons back in 1982. In recent years, Bishop Nolan has been most outspoken in seeking to rid Scotland and the world of these weapons of mass destruction. You're most welcome, Bishop Nolan. Have we lost Bishop Nolan?
Oh well, sorry about that. I keep doing that. I've been plenty of Zoom calls, so I'm talking away to myself and nobody's been able to hear.
Heart attack there.
So, thank you, Mary. I want to go back to 1963 and to Pope John the 23rd. He's the first Pope really that I have got kind of living memory of, and that might be the case for some of you here as well tonight. Back in 1963, Pope John wrote an encyclical called Peace on Earth. And in that encyclical, he said that nuclear weapons should be banned. That was 1963. And here we are 58 years later, and they are finally banned. So I was delighted just a couple of years ago in 2017 to go to the Vatican. They had the treaty had been passed by the UN in May, and the Vatican had a conference in November, which I attended. And it was great to be there. There was great enthusiasm about the place, and it was quite a wonderful atmosphere. And if it was left to those who were at that conference, then there wouldn't be any nuclear weapons at all. But it did strike me that there's no point in us who are committed to nuclear weapons or who quite clearly see the immorality of even possessing them, just talking to ourselves and enthusing ourselves. We have to talk and engage with others who've got a different point of view. Now, at that conference, I felt a little bit sorry. There was one man from NATO. I felt a bit sorry for him. But when he got up to talk, he says, all the members of NATO want rid of nuclear weapons. Now, of course, I'm thinking, well, they're not really going about it, are they? You know, we've got the non-proliferation treaty, but here are all the nuclear states are in fact engaging in producing new and better nuclear weapons to keep them going for another few decades. But that is what you hear. You know, we all want rid of nuclear weapons, but of course, you know, you're just too idealistic. You've got to be practical and real. You know, you can't uninvent what we already have. So that's one argument against, and that's got to be dealt with, or else we don't make any progress with other people. Also there at that conference, there was an Israeli lady, and she got up to speak. And she says that the fact that Israel has nuclear weapons makes her sleep more peacefully at night. Now, I was actually sitting beside a Palestinian who told me the fact that Israel had nuclear weapons didn't make him sleep any more peacefully at night. But that's the other aspect. Having these weapons gives people a sense of security. And you're taking away that security blanket. And that's a big step. And that can only happen whenever there is trust between nations. Otherwise, no, I've got to cling to my weapons because I need them. And every time there's a campaign against nuclear weapons, like a campaign about renewing Trident, suddenly the media are always full of scare stories, and we're hearing about the threat from Russia. And of course, that immediately weakens our sense of security. We don't feel secure anymore. We feel threatened, and we've got to protect ourselves. So we keep hold of our nuclear weapons because we want to protect ourselves. We would never use them improperly, but we don't want other states to use them or to even have them. Now, there's a certain hypocrisy there among nuclear power states. When the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty came into force in 1970, there were 5 nuclear powers. And those 5, of course, were also the permanent members of the Security Council. So if you've got nuclear powers, you're one of the big boys. It gives you a certain status. And we've got to, the Baroness mentioned that, I think, and that's certainly there. There's status in having nuclear weapons because, you know, my arsenal is bigger than your arsenal. So we've got to deal with that. That is there. That status idea is still there. And it's a status symbol. There's also money interest. There's big money in nuclear weapons. If you know, I mean, there must be companies that eyes are rolling with dollar signs because they think, oh my goodness, we're going to renew Trident and spend billions of pounds over the next few decades on Trident. There's money interest there as well in nuclear weapons. I mean, America has reduced its nuclear arsenal. I think way back in the 60s or 70s, there's something like 37,000 nuclear weapons, and now they're only down to about 6,000 or so. They have reduced that, but I mean, even they would recognise they don't need those 6,000. You know, if we think they don't need any, but you know, even if you believe in nuclear weapons, you don't need those 6,000. But they won't reduce them because you know, there's politics there, the states who house these weapons and so on and so forth. There's money interest, so all that is there as well, and those are all kind of obstacles we have to deal with. And also, we have to deal with the fact we're not just dealing with the 9 states who actually have nuclear weapons. We also have to deal with the other states who are sheltering under the nuclear umbrella. In fact, some of those states have nuclear weapons on their soil. Italy, Germany, Belgium, Holland, Turkey, they all do not possess nuclear weapons, but they have nuclear weapons on their soil. And I read something on the internet just the other day there, activists in Norway trying to persuade their government to sign this treaty. They don't have nuclear weapons, but the government won't do it because they feel it's contrary to their commitments to NATO. So I think we have to work on those countries which are quietly sheltering under that nuclear umbrella and have a movement there. The more they haven't signed the treaty, it's not just the nuclear powers who haven't signed the treaty, these other powers haven't signed the treaty either, and they have to be worked on and persuaded otherwise to support this treaty. One of the scandals, I think, is the fact that every time the renewal of Trident was discussed in Westminster, the members of Parliament easily approved it. That was a great, and it's kind of hard varnish. You mentioned up here in Scotland, of course, there's such an anti-nuclear movement in Parliament and so on, and in society as well, in the churches and elsewhere. And it's so sad that Westminster Parliament approves Trident and the renewal of Trident so easily. The United Kingdom signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1968. We're about to the ongoing process of renewing Trident, the missiles and the submarines. 100 years on, in 2068, we'll still have nuclear weapons, even though we signed that treaty. In that treaty, which has been very successful, in other countries have not developed their own nuclear weapons, it has not been very successful in persuading the existing nuclear powers to disarm. Article 6 commits them to taking steps to do so. And we can certainly see that in recent years, they haven't even been talking about that. I got a wee bit on the internet tonight. I think President Biden is hoping to renew the START Treaty and extend it for another 5 years. That is good. That is a way forward in small steps. This treaty bans nuclear weapons. It doesn't actually tell us how we're actually going to get rid of them. And some of the nuclear states will say, well, you got to get rid of the nuclear weapons first, and then you ban them. But the purpose behind this treaty is to shame the nuclear states who show no intention of wanting to get rid of their weapons, to shame them and tell them this is not acceptable. It's not acceptable to have chemical weapons. It's not acceptable to have biological weapons. They have been banned. It's not acceptable to have nuclear weapons either. And to go back to the past again, I remember when the police first introduced the breathalyzer test. And back in those days, people who were caught drink driving would get sympathy. And the pub people would say, oh, that's a shame you get caught by the police there, you know, that's terrible that. And other people would say, oh, I can have a good couple of pints, I'm still fine behind the wheel, it doesn't impair my driving. You don't get people saying that nowadays, and people don't get sympathy nowadays for drink driving. We want to change the culture, and this treaty, hopefully, is a step forward in changing that culture. You're no longer one of the big boys having nuclear power and being a status symbol. It's going to be a sign of shame instead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bishop Nolan. I think that changing the culture is where we start today. And thank you to all of our highly inspirational speakers for making this a special day, but one of thoughtful reflection and prayer. Thank you also to all of you who've joined us this evening. I noticed that there were a few of you who weren't able to come in till a bit later on. And in theory, we're recording this tonight. So if I can work this out properly, I should be able to get links to people and make sure that you can listen again to those inspirational speeches that we've heard this evening. For Pax Christi Scotland, this is obviously a significant milestone, and for the whole of the peace movement, it's the start of much work to come, as we've heard this evening. This is the beginning, or it's halfway up that mountain, isn't it? And for us, as I said, the next steps will be to seek nuclear divestment. And we hope that you'll go to our website and our social media pages to join us in working not just for a nuclear-free world, but also for a non-violent world. But for now, I would ask Father John Convery to bring our vigil to a close this evening in the same prayerful way that we've sought to mark this historic day. Father John.
Thank you, Marion. It has always been a tradition at vigils, in the Christian tradition at least, where the faithful would recite the litany of saints to remember the ancestors, the people of faith have gone before them. Great examples of faith have gone before them. I'd like to invite everybody just to pause for a moment of silence Treaties, agreements, contracts are about people. The effects of these treaties and discussions and conversations affect people. So let's remember in a brief moment this evening, as for our litany at this vigil, just in the innermost silence of our hearts, the names of those who have gone before us, people who have shown us great example in their fight for peace and justice. And also this evening to remember in a very special way in our hearts, all those who have gone before us, victims of this horrible pandemic, the families affected, the communities affected by this, all those who have suffered the consequences of war and violence. Just the litany is about saying names. Just let's spend a minute in silence and say those names to ourselves inside our own hearts. And let us pray. O God, we cannot undo the past or make it never have happened. Neither can you. There are some things that are not possible even for you, but not many. We ask you humbly and from the bottom of our hearts, please God, would you write straight with our crooked lines out of the serious mistakes of our lives? Will you make something beautiful for you? Teach us to live at peace with you, to make peace with others, and even with ourselves. Give us fresh vision. Let us experience your love so deeply that we are free to face the future with a steady eye, forgiven and strong in hope. And may God bless us. May he keep us. May he protect us. And may he watch over us this night and always. Amen.
Amen. Thank you again, Father John. Thank you, everybody. Perhaps you'd like to put on your mics just before we go away. Thank you all for the comments in the chat box. That's very gratifying to see that you've enjoyed, perhaps that's the wrong word, but appreciated this evening. So thank you, and have a good evening. Let's start the rest of our campaign to make this a nuclear-free world, and stay safe and stay COVID-free. Thank you very, very much. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Night.
John,
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
speakers.
you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
God bless. Thanks, Marion.
Thanks, Marion.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Mary.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye. Lots of carols I'm seeing. Thank you, Bishop Joel.
Thank you then, Marion. It's lovely to be with you. Right.
And you, thank you.
Thank you, Marion.
Thank you.
This evening, sleet and snow across East Anglia will clear away overnight. Wintry showers will persist in the west and it will be frosty and in places icy. Tomorrow.
Make sure that we have Henry. Hello, thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Thanks, Marianne. It was a great evening. Keep up the good work. God bless.
Thank you. Bye now.
Thanks.
Helen.
Bye now. Thank you so much.
Sister Maria, how are you? Thank you very much for coming. Great to see you.
Pleasure. So insightful this evening.
Very
much appreciated, and thanks to all the speakers and yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marion.
Thank you, Helen. It's been good to see you all.
Thank you.
Right. I'm going to stop the recording.
Bye. Thanks. Great. Really good.
Bye, Kit. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Marion. It really was inspiring. It was just